Corruption remains one of the most pervasive and damaging problems across Europe, influencing politics, economics, and societal well-being. While many European countries are known for their transparency and robust democratic institutions, others grapple with deeply entrenched corruption that hampers their progress. In this video, we will explore the 10 most corrupt countries in Europe, examining the systemic issues, key players, and the consequences of corruption in each. From political bribery to state capture, these nations present some of the most significant challenges in the fight for good governance and transparency on the continent. First on the list is Ukraine, a country that has long struggled with corruption across all levels of government and society. Despite the 2014 Euromaidan revolution, which saw Ukrainians rise up against a corrupt regime, and despite ongoing efforts to reform the system, corruption remains a major obstacle. Oligarchs hold significant sway over the country's political and economic landscape, and this power dynamic has led to widespread misuse of state resources. Bribery is still common, from low-level government employees to high-ranking officials. Transparency International has repeatedly ranked Ukraine as one of the most corrupt countries in Europe. Although the nation continues to make strides in combating these issues, especially with the support of international institutions and reforms aimed at reducing oligarchic influence. Next is Moldova, a small Eastern European country that has also faced deep-rooted corruption for decades. Moldova has been rocked by numerous corruption scandals, including the infamous billion-dollar bank heist in 2014, where an astonishing $1 billion, equivalent to 12% of the country's GDP, vanished from its banking system. This scandal severely impacted Moldova's economy and its international reputation. Corruption in Moldova is often linked to political instability and the struggle for influence between pro-European and pro-Russian forces. Politicians have been known to exploit their positions for personal gain, and oligarchs hold considerable control over the media and key industries, further complicating efforts to root out corruption. Albania, another country on our list, has been plagued by corruption, particularly within its judicial system and law enforcement agencies. Despite efforts to align with European Union standards in a bid to gain EU membership, Albania continues to face significant challenges in establishing a fully transparent government. Corruption often manifests in the form of nepotism and cronyism, with public officials using their positions to benefit their families and friends. The Albanian public has grown increasingly frustrated with the slow pace of reform, as many of the same elites who have benefited from corruption remain in positions of power. However, pressure from the EU and other international bodies has prompted some improvements in recent years, particularly in the areas of judicial reform and anti-corruption legislation. Moving on, we have Romania, a country that has made significant progress in combating corruption over the past decade, yet remains one of the most corrupt nations in Europe. Romania's anti-corruption agency, the National Anti-Corruption Directorate, DNA, has been particularly effective in bringing high-profile cases against corrupt politicians, judges, and business leaders. However, corruption continues to be a serious issue, particularly in local governments and certain sectors of the economy. In 2017, mass protests erupted after the government attempted to pass legislation that would have effectively decriminalized certain forms of corruption. These protests, which were the largest in Romania since the fall of communism, demonstrated the public's frustration with the ongoing corruption problem. While the country has made strides in tackling this issue, there is still much work to be done to ensure transparency and accountability at all levels of government. Bulgaria is another EU member state that struggles with significant corruption. Despite its commitments to EU values and governance standards, corruption in Bulgaria is pervasive, particularly in the judiciary and public procurement sectors. Businesses frequently report that they are expected to pay bribes to win government contracts or to avoid bureaucratic delays. Additionally, Bulgaria has struggled with state capture, where powerful private interests effectively control key government decisions for their own benefit. These issues have undermined public trust in government institutions and slowed the country's economic development. Despite some recent efforts to crack down on corruption, including reforms to the judicial system, Bulgaria remains one of the most corrupt countries in the European Union. In the Western Balkans, Bosnia and Herzegovina stands out for its high levels of corruption, which have been deeply rooted since the end of the Bosnian War in the 1990s. The country's complex political structure, with its multiple layers of government and ethnic divisions, has made it difficult to implement effective anti-corruption reforms. Corruption is widespread in both the public and private sectors, with politicians and business leaders frequently accused of embezzling public funds and engaging in fraudulent activities. The lack of a unified, effective government has allowed corruption to flourish, and efforts to tackle the problem have been hampered by political infighting and a lack of political will. Bosnia and Herzegovina's progress toward European integration has been slowed by these issues, as the EU has repeatedly called for more robust anti-corruption measures. Hungary has seen a worrying rise in corruption in recent years, particularly under the leadership of Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. Critics accuse Orbán and his ruling party, Fidesz, of undermining democratic institutions and using state resources to enrich their allies. One of the most prominent examples of this is the misuse of EU funds, which have reportedly been funneled to businesses and individuals with close ties to the government. Hungary's slide toward authoritarianism has raised concerns both within the country and abroad, with the European Union taking steps to withhold funding and demand reforms. However, Orbán remains popular among many Hungarians, and his government continues to resist pressure from the EU to address the corruption issue more effectively. Russia is notorious for its corruption, which permeates nearly every aspect of life in the country. The Russian government is widely seen as being controlled by a small group of oligarchs and political elites who use their positions to accumulate vast wealth. Bribery is a common practice in both the public and private sectors, and those who attempt to expose corruption often face intimidation or even violence. Transparency International consistently ranks Russia as one of the most corrupt countries in Europe, and efforts to tackle the problem have been largely ineffective. Under President Vladimir Putin, corruption has become institutionalized, with the Kremlin using state resources to maintain its grip on power and reward loyal supporters. North Macedonia has also faced significant challenges with corruption, particularly in its political and judicial systems. Corruption scandals have plagued the country for years, and despite promises of reform, progress has been slow. One of the most high-profile scandals in recent years was the wiretapping scandal, in which it was revealed that the government had illegally intercepted the communications of thousands of citizens, including journalists and political opponents. This scandal led to widespread protests and eventually the resignation of Prime Minister Nill. However, corruption remains a significant problem in North Macedonia, and it continues to pose a barrier to the country's aspirations for EU membership.